It is a pleasure for me to be here in Singapore. I've spent the last several days receiving one of the most hospitable, warm receptions I've had for quite some time. It's always a wonderful experience for me to make new friends in different cities. Friends, in fact, that I've had for many years and from whom I've learned so much. I want to tell you at the outset that I am immensely impressed with what I have seen here over the last few days. Not just among these friends who have invited me here, but also in your culture, in what appears in your newspaper, what I have seen put out by your governmental agencies for the sake of the family. Because you see, one of the marks of a great civilization is the care that it has for strangers. Anybody can care for his own family, but the people such as the sponsors of this, the Family Enrichment Society, have this generosity and magnanimity to care what happens to other people's children. I have had the experience, in fact, as soon as I got off the plane, I was handed this booklet put out by the Ministry of Community Development called Essential Parenting Tips. If you haven't seen it, I suggest that you read it. It is just absolutely wonderful, filled with commonsensical explanations, commonsensical advice of the essence of raising kids to have character. It is, for that reason, I do thank the Ministry for Community Development for helping to support this conference this morning, and the SO of Singapore also for their support. I want to give you some ideas in the course of this day today, though from the experience of other people who've had success in raising their children well. And by that, I don't just mean that the kids grow up to make a great deal of money. I mean that they grow up to be great men and women. It is possible, even today, in our competitive, driving, materialistic society, which is a worldwide phenomenon, awash as we are in money, and deprived as we are in things like conscience and morality, it is possible to raise children of whom we can be proud throughout their lives. You know, it is essential that any society cares what happens within the family, because it is within the family that the bedrock of the society itself is formed as a foundation. Did you know there was a great idea given out by Mohandas Gandhi, who was, of course, the great liberator of the Indian subcontinent, and he spoke of the 7 social sins that afflict any culture and can lead to the downfall of a civilization. He said these are wealth without work, commerce without morality, science without humanity, politics without principle, religion without sacrifice, pleasure without conscience, education without character. It is within the home that children acquire from their parents, and mostly by example, as I will explain this today, the concepts and the practice of work, morality, humanity, principle, sacrifice, conscience, and character. That's what we're here today to talk about. Character. I have to tell you, this is one of the great challenges that parents everywhere find. Because, as you well know, children do not come into the world with character. They come into the world with some wonderful traits. But they can drive you crazy. I've had one set of parents after another tell me, you know, I am about 5 minutes away from a nervous breakdown when I'm dealing with my 2-year-old. If you look, I heard a story, for example, of a woman who brought her 2.5-year-old son to a doctor's office for an examination, to the pediatrician. And while the little boy was in the waiting room, he was ripping up the couch cushions, throwing them across, you know, exploring under, knocking over the coffee table. And the doctor came out and saw this little barbarian in action and said, does your son have a behavior problem? And she said in an exhausted voice, I don't know. I've never seen him behave. The challenge of taking this youngster and turning him into a civilized man, to take your little daughter and turn her into a civilized great woman of whom every society depends, is the challenge of being a parent. This thing called character is worth our looking at a little bit before we get into detail, because it's really the framework of what your job is. You see, character is what people admire in us, aside from our skills and talents, and despite our shortcomings. It's what people see in us aside from our skills and talents. There are plenty of people who are active in the celebrities, the entertainment and sports industries in my country, of course, they're worldwide renowned, who are, you may call, technically skilled barbarians. Apart from their technical skill, they are not the kind of people you'd like to see hanging around your daughter. And also, our character is despite our shortcomings. Indeed, there are people who have serious shortcomings. They may have problems with alcohol, for instance, or they have a short temper. Nonetheless, they're people of character. It's because of what they do with those shortcomings, their constant struggle against them. So everybody admires them despite their faults and in spite of their talents and skills. Character is, as somebody once put it, what you have left over if you ever have to go broke. If you ever lose your money and material possessions, what you have left over is your character. If there's nothing to you but your money or possessions, and you are deprived of them, let's say by economic recession or depression or panic, then you have nothing left to fall back on. And this doesn't just happen in times of economic downturn. It can happen in normal life. Did you know that at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, my native city of Boston, there is an average of 2 suicides a year. These are youngsters, young people of extreme talent, of excellent SATs who did extremely well in school. They memorized, they gave back answers, they had always achieved A's. Then they go away to the university, and for the first time in their lives, they achieve a B. For the first time in their lives, they have seen a downturn in the one thing that mattered to them, which was numerical achievement on tests. And as a result, they take their own lives. They haven't much to live for. Character is what we have left over if we've ever been deprived of what we value most in the material world. This is something for you to keep in mind, because, it's a truism among economists that there has been a great economic downturn, what we call a depression or a panic, about once every 25 years, as far back as we can remember, going back to about the mid-1700s. The last one of a worldwide depression was more than 60 years ago. We're a bit overdue. You people had something of a tremor in this part of the world, just the last couple of years, and I'm sure it has affected your pocketbooks and probably your ability to sleep at night. But that may be nothing compared with what's coming. Your children are going to live through the next 60 years or 70 years, and the chances of their living through that time without having some serious challenge to their personality, to their livelihood, their chances are very, very high that they're going to run into serious trouble. What will they have to fall back on? Competition is only part of adult life. Collaboration is just as important. Character is most important when it comes to making your way through tough times. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later, but that's a thought I want to leave you with for now. What is this character framework? Well, let me put it this way. How can we look at what character is, what your job is? Kids come into the world with some beautiful traits, as we know. They are cuddly, they're adorable. They bring out all of the great powers within us when they're very, very small. You know yourself, one of the most fantastic experiences, and parents have told me it's practically a religious experience for them, is to look down and see their children sleeping at night. To see them quiet at last. Lying in bed, with the blood of their ancestors flowing through their veins, with their little chests heaving up and down, and their whole life ahead of them. Absolutely beautiful. Or when they reach up to you and grab you around the neck, and you can see in their eyes that you are the center of their universe. They are so charming. The great philosopher Ming Kuo was the pupil of Confucius. said, "A great person is one who never loses the heart that he had as a child." And that's very true. What is inside the heart of children? What are the loves that children have and show? The first is the love for their family. For their family. The greatest nightmare children can have is to be separated from their family. And your job is to see that they never lose that love, because the love for family is at the center of your life. If the kids don't have family first in their lives, then they will have nothing but an emptiness at the center of their existence, of their soul. We see around us in every prosperous society young people who've grown up to be absolute narcissists. And a narcissist is someone who cares neither for his parents nor his own children, if he ever has any. They care only for self. When we speak about family values throughout this conference, when we talk about any values, we're talking about priorities. The real priority is family. Family comes first. It comes ahead of wealth. It comes ahead of pleasure, that we would go to any lengths to avoid disgracing and hurting our family, to return hatred, or what's worse than hatred, indifference to those who have loved us and to whom we owe everything. That is family value. The other thing that young children have as their love is their love for life. You know yourself, your own children, they bounce out of bed in the morning, having kept you up half the night. They bounce out of bed in the morning, and they look forward to the day as a kind of gift, as an adventure, a chance for fun and accomplishment with family and friends. That is how children love their life. And that is something they have to have all their lives, too. That they grow up in the morning and they look forward to a day's work. They're doing work they enjoy. That they value friends, family, fun, laughter, no matter what happens to them. They will have this if they see it in you. If they do not have it, if they grow up not to love life itself, but rather the pleasures and baubles within it, they can be tempted with suicide. The first crisis that can come into their lives can destroy them. I don't know how it is in your society, but in mine, in the United States, the suicide rate among young people, 15 to 23, has tripled in the last 25 years. The rate has tripled. And psychiatrists and psychologists are appalled at the petty reasons kids have for taking their own lives. You know, university students, their first year, they're away from the family. They have a breakup with their boyfriend or their girlfriend. They have a very serious decline in their grades. They get into a downward spiral because they have nothing to live for. They've worked all their lives to get into Harvard or MIT. And now that they're there, what is there left? And they take their lives. Did you know that in the U.S., the suicide rate among young people is directly proportional to family income? It's not kids from the poor families who take their own lives. It's kids from the middle class, upper middle class, and wealthiest classes. The kids in the poorest areas have to struggle from day to day just to make it. They have a life ahead of them to lead. The wealthier kids, they have everything that they've ever wanted, except perhaps somebody who loves them just for themselves, no matter what happens, no matter what they do. And so they take their lives when they've lost the great love that they had, which was accomplishment, money, achievement. There's nothing at the center of their lives of love. And Min Kuo said, they also the love for the truth. The truth. Kids have a wonderful way of putting their pudgy little finger right on the truth, don't they? I knew this of this woman who was riding with her son one time in a train. And there was another woman who got into a seat right in front of them who was, shall we say, ample. All right? She was quite a bit overweight. And her little girl leaned over and said to her mother, kind of in a loud whisper, "Boy, Mom, she is really F-A-T." I knew of a man one time who had invited his boss home for dinner. And the man was quite nervous about it. And his boss was sitting in the living room having a drink before dinner, and the the man went into the kitchen to confer with their wife, and in walked the couple's little 4.5-year-old boy, who looked up at the boss sitting there in the chair and was staring at him. Now, the boss was in his 50s, bald head, a little bit on the heavy side. You know what I'm talking about. And the little kid looks at him, and finally the boss says, "What are you staring at there, little fella?" And the kid said, "My daddy says you're a self-made man." "Are you really?" So the boss puffs up with pride, and he says, "That's right, son, I am a self-made man." And the kid said, "How come you made yourself like that?" The kids have to always have a love for the truth, including, those times when they've done wrong and they have to admit it. I mean, one of the greatest bonds of cement in a marriage is when the husband and the wife say to each other, "I'm sorry, I was wrong, please forgive me." That's the truth. I was wrong. That pride doesn't get in the way of truth and justice. The greatest bond in any family is when both parents recognize the truth. I have faults. Everybody has faults. I've been wrong, and I apologize. And if the kids don't have this love for the truth, they can grow up to be liars. And liars get into very serious trouble in the business world. So we see kids do come in with these qualities: love for family, love for life, love for the truth. And parents have to make sure those same loves are still inside of them. And they will be if the kids see them still inside the family, their parents. If they see their mother and father have a love for family above all, a love for life itself, friendship, laughter. They don't just simply live to work. They work in order to live. If they see their parents have a sense for the truth and demand the truth of them, they will retain these things all their lives, and it can make them great. But there's more work to do, in raising the kids. Because let's face it, even though the kids come into the world with these wonderful, charming traits, great loves within them, when they're very, very small, they also are, let's face it, utterly self-centered hedonists and barbarians. They are totally given over to gratifying their appetites and their passions. They are determined to grab for everything as soon as they can get it, and to dominate the lives of everybody around them by force or by manipulation. Am I right? You may have noticed this especially in other people's children, huh? I knew this woman in New York, a very, very successful professor at New York University, who from time to time used to take care of small kids, look in on kids in a daycare center in the large apartment building where she lived in Greenwich Village. And the group of kids there were just persecuting this poor little 5-year-old boy. This little kid, you know how it is. You get a bunch of kids together, one of them is going to be in the receiving end of trouble. And this poor little kid was being persecuted time after time. So the woman gathered all the other little kids together, sat them down, and said, "Why do you do this to this little boy?" And one of the little girls just piped up, opened her eyes wide, and said, "'Cause it's fun. Cruelty is fun." Did you notice she was honest about it, though? No equivocation, no giving excuses or anything, just right straightforward. You could just see evil in itself combined with truthfulness. This is some of the worst kinds of people we have, isn't it? That where sincerity is their only virtue. So in any event, your job is to make sure your kids don't grow up that way. That by the time they're 15 or 18 or 25 or 35, they are not still absolutely self-centered, given over to gratifying appetites and passions, and determined to dominate everybody around them. That is your job. I have known people who've succeeded at this job. They are just wonderful men and women, and everything I have to say to you today has come from their experience in doing it. We're going to get into the how a little bit later on this morning, but it's important for us to see the why. I think one mistake many parents make is that they're looking for kind of shortcuts for controlling their kids. I just want the pain to stop. My 13-year-old is walking around like a gorilla. How do I make him behave like a civilized human being? If you're looking just to control behavior rather than shape their hearts, minds, and wills, you're going to meet with frustration. But if you seek to impart character within the kids, their sense of judgment, responsibility, courageous perseverance, self-control, magnanimous considerateness, if you don't seek to impart these things, you're going to have trouble with your kids later on. Because you see, if kids do not have a change made in them as they're growing up, then they grow up with unchanged, and they wind up at 15 or 18 with the same mentality that they had when they were 2 or 3 years old. They may be technically skilled. They may be great test takers. They may get very far initially in their career, but sooner or later they run into serious trouble in life, and so do you. You see, you want to look at it this way. The real evil that we're up against, and it doesn't matter what our religious background is here, I think this is something all of us can agree upon. The real evil is materialism. We're all up against materialism. Now, the real evil of materialism is not the pursuit of things. It's not just simply getting, a jacket with a very expensive logo on it, which is, by the way, one of the greatest con jobs of the 20th century, when you think of it. Most companies have to pay to have their goods advertised. And they have managed to con enough people to walk around and do it, not just for free, but to pay them to do it. Materialism is not simply a hefty bank account. It's not driving around an expensive car. The real evil of materialism is not the pursuit of things. It's treating other people like things. It is seeing other human beings as simply objects. That the whole purpose of life is not service. It is not gratitude. It is not considerateness for the rights and sensibilities of others. It is rather the pursuit of pleasure, the avoidance of pain, the imposition of power. That is the real evil of materialism. And when you consider other human beings as things, for example, when you're a 25-year-old young guy on the way up professionally, and your mother and father are in the way, then you just kind of put them out of the way. If it is a hassle for you to have the prospect of raising a child, then you'd go without a child. Life is just for me. I'm the center of everything. That is the evil of materialism. When we see other people as things, then of course we can put things ahead of people. We will put money ahead of our family. We will put pleasure and power ahead of marriage itself. Now, all of us with different faiths, different philosophies, may disagree as to why human beings have rights, why human beings are not mere objects, but I think we can all agree on that. There's something different about the human being. The 20th century has been a laboratory of proving the evil of this philosophy. Ask any Jew. Ask anybody who's suffered racial persecution. Ask anybody who's been economically exploited. Human beings are not things. And your children have to understand that. If you want to look at it this way, the entire moral development of children is to move from self to others. That's what Gandhi was referring to before. From self to others. Others have rights. Others have sensibilities. Therefore, I am obligated to respect them. And that's what responsibility means. That's what justice is all about. When the kids do not have this kind of inner conscience that comes from their parents, and don't forget, conscience throughout life is the inner voice of our mother and father's lessons of right and wrong. That's all conscience is. The lessons of our parents that remain with us our life, because our love for them remains with us. When the kids do not have that conscience, they may wind up to have great technical skill, but will treat other people like things. This is not only wrong, it's also dangerous for their careers, if I may say so. There's a saying in American business. To do the right thing is usually, almost always, also to do the smart thing. To behave honestly and ethically, to have consideration for people's rights and feelings, is also good business. Ask anybody, what are the most successful businesses? You will find there are those who are most service-oriented. They do not treat their customers as things. Companies that do treat their employees and customers as things find themselves very swiftly heading towards bankruptcy. You've seen in my country, for example, I'm sure you've heard about it, kids who are technically skilled computer experts. They've worked all their life, done very well all their life. They could be earning a very high salary. And what do they do for fun? They send viruses out around the country to hurt people whom they've never met for the sake of fun. Technically skilled barbarians. You see these two boys that you read about in Littleton, Colorado, something my country is still shaking from. These two youngsters who did very well in school. You know, they achieved good grades. That's pretty much what their parents expected of them. I mean, the really dismaying thing about that incident with those two boys is they came from apparently normal families. And if that's what normal families are like these days, heaven help us all. The mother and the father wanted the kids to do well in school, and then just to keep them from being bored, they gave them all kinds of video games, all kinds of pleasures, you know, had their own room into which they made their own little world. You didn't have a family there. You had, you know, several people living under the same roof. That's all. The parents had no idea what was going on in the lives of their kids. If you don't care what happens to the lives of your kids, what have you got left to lose? So these kids then, because they never had a close association with their parents, look for heroes elsewhere. Kids who do not respect and love their mother and father will go chasing after celebrities and clowns. And there they find them in the entertainment industry. And when they are constantly fed, something, a really dreadful development in recent times. You know, there are some American thinkers who are very concerned about this. The video games in which kids practice killing people. I mean, this is the first instance, really, you know, since the time of the Roman Empire, that people have deliberately taken pleasure in seeing, at least in this case in virtual reality, other human beings get hurt, have enjoyed doing it on a commercial basis. Now, you people here in Singapore know what it was like to be on the receiving end, as you were in World War II, of a vicious brutality, of people being treated like things. What on earth is going through the minds of us as a people when we put before our children games in which they practice killing tens of thousands of people just for the fun of it? We ought not to be surprised that some kids will push this to the extreme and want to do it for real. But even if they don't do that, what does it do inside of their soul to treat other human beings as objects? Does it have some kind of wearing effect on them? You know, I mean, if exposing the kids to good music is supposed to make them cultured and civilized, what does exposing them to purposeful violence have as an effect? I think it's a mark of something seriously wrong in our society, worldwide. Let me say something here more about character itself. You know, when we talk about the development of character in kids, what we mean is that they acquire these virtues that I've mentioned to you before. Judgment, the ability to think like competent adults, the ability to make the great distinctions in life, right from wrong, truth from falsehood, good from evil, then all the other distinctions, heroes from celebrities, the purpose of useful work versus simply working for its own sake, the distinction between service and selfishness, the other distinctions, you know, between family and simply a group of people living together, between marriage and its commitments and a relationship of mutual usefulness. All of these distinctions are the things the kids have to learn. Somebody once asked a great Oxford Don, what is the purpose of an education? I think the reporters that asked that were expecting a kind of, you know, detailed, rambling, very highfalutin explanation. What the Oxford Don said, well, the purpose of education is so that young people will recognize rubbish when they see it. I think that's pretty good, don't you? That they will know evil when they see it. They will know propaganda when they see it. They will know foolishness when they see it. They will realize that, you know, people who are concerned only with having the latest fad, the latest everything, are something wrong with their own sense of security. And the greatest achievements in human history have been taking place among people who, at some point, didn't give a hoot what anybody else thought. Well, creativity comes from feeling a little bit different from others, from our neighbors. Judgment also means conscience. Did you have a choice of writing a virus and sending it out to the public, or simply sticking with your work? The voice of your conscience will say, why hurt other people? Why do damage to people? Why ruin people's days? You know, why ruin people's lives? Why cause monetary damage, wasting time to people. It's wrong. And it's the sound of people hearing their mothers, and their father inside of them saying, don't do harm to others who've done no harm to you. It's unjust. It's wrong. And we don't do that to others. Then we've got the sense of responsibility, that kids learn, that other people have rights, therefore we have duties. And that if we don't do our duty, other people get hurt. If your children have a responsibility around the house to make their own beds in the morning, and even if you have maid service, even if you have live-in servants, it's not a bad thing to get them to make their own bed. Let them see it's kind of a metaphor for life. If you made a mess, you have to clean it up. If you've rumpled something, you have to straighten it. If you've done something wrong, you have to apologize. That's the way honorable people live. So the kids see, if I don't do what I'm supposed to do, other people get injured. And so ultimately, responsibility is a sense of heart. Then courageous perseverance and self-control. If they are offered drugs someplace, they will turn it down because they hear the voice of their parents saying it's wrong. It destroys people's lives. I know you have stringent measures to control drug use here in this country, and I hope they remain with you. There are many Americans who envy you for having done that, especially families who have been damaged by drugs. But don't forget, we have instantaneous jet service now. It's very easy to visit other countries. Your kids may study someplace somewhere else, and somebody, someplace, for sure, is going to offer them drugs. Will they hear the voice that you have inside of them to say no? Great parents understand that no, the word no, is also a loving word. That from time to time the kids have to hear loving denial from their parents. And then self-control, that they learn to control their temper, that they learn to apologize to people, to restrain themselves against temptation. And then finally, magnanimity, generosity of spirit, that we look at others and we see other human beings who deserve the best that I have, that the kids will live ethically, honorably, and generously with others. So your job as a parent, and kind of a summary of this, is like this. Your job is not simply to impart skills in your kids, through tutorials and hard work, so that they will grow up to be technically skilled people. Indeed, you may do that, because they have to be to compete. Competition is part of life. There's no question about it. But your job is not simply to keep the kids busy and active and technically skilled. Your enemy is not boredom, and it's not future unemployment. Your enemy is materialism. And for the sake of your children's welfare, and for the sake of their presenting you someday with a continued family and grandchildren, then you have this job, to raise your children day by day to become competent, responsible, considerate, generous men and women who are committed to live by principles of integrity all their lives, no matter what the cost. That's your job. Your job, in other words, is to raise adults, not children. How do people manage to do this? Well, there are several different ways I've seen them do it. There is a handout that you're going to get sometime today that lists about 13 rules, 13 ways in which parents can combat materialism. I had a call from an editor of a magazine in Dallas, Texas, who asked me in typical Texas fashion, look, could you just take your whole philosophy of raising kids and put it in 1,000 words? Just one page? I said, sure, I'll try. So I did just that. You're going to get that. It's called Born to Serve, Not to Shop. And within there, you will see a certain approach that people have that has a couple of bases. One of them is great parents are the people who think 20 or 30 years ahead with their kids. Long-distance planning is the key to success in any human enterprise, especially this all-important one. What kind of men and women are my kids going to be when they're in their 20s and 30s? You see, it's like this. The great parents don't think in terms of the kids' careers. They think in terms of the kids' characters. And most of all, if I may put it this way, they think in terms of the children's future marriage. It's a very easy thing when we're under a great deal of stress. There's a lot of pressure on us. We don't have much time. It's perfectly understandable among parents, that the horizon of your concern, it extends maybe 48 hours ahead, or to this weekend, or perhaps to the end of next summer, where we're going to go on vacation. But the real key to dealing with kids effectively is to strengthen and lengthen the vision that you have. Look at your children now, see them as men and women in their late 20s, and the difference between the way they are now and the way they should be then is what keeps you going. It's kind of like this. If you look at your kids now, you will see their faults. You will see, for instance, are they impulsive and irresponsible right now? Well, they have to learn to be self-controlled and responsible. That is done with the rules in the home, which will be the topic of my next talk. But if you look ahead and you see, someday my son or daughter is going to be driving. What's going to happen to my son or daughter as a driver if they have not changed from the way they are right now? You can look out in any society and see people driving automobiles who have no business being behind the wheel of a car. There are kids who see life as nothing but play, whose whole life is devoted to drudgery with schoolwork and then wild excess play, and the opposite. They go from drudgery to debauchery, when they are kids. And it's no mistake that they see, I work so very hard, I also have to play very hard, as I have since I'm a youngster. And kids who have this mentality treat the automobile like a toy. And they kill themselves or cripple others in record numbers. There was a very interesting statistic that came out by the National Highway Transport Safety Board in the U.S. in 1995. Most statistics are quite dull, but this one was quite interesting. They did a 10-year survey of all 50 states in the United States to find out, just from the driving records, accident records, what were the causes of teenage driving fatalities. Kids who get killed in automobile accidents. And there was a big surprise. I think you folks probably know that about 50% of all automobile accidents worldwide, I'm quite sure this is true, are caused by alcohol abuse. You're aware of that, right? About 1/2 of all automobile fatalities are caused by abuse of alcohol. 50%. What would you guess was the figure for teenagers? How many of you would say it was over 75%? How many of you would say that? Just raise your hands, just think. I see just about everybody. Most people would say that. Do you know what the figure was? 5%. Only 5% of teenage driving fatalities were caused by drunk driving. What caused all of the others? Speeding, reckless driving, running red lights, running stop signs, impulsiveness, listening to loud music and then driving, with the beat of it. In other words, if you want to look at it this way, a lack of judgment, conscience, responsibility, self-control, concern for the rights and welfare of others. The kids had everything except a conscience, and it finally wound up killing them. You see, your job is not to raise kids who are happy and cheerful. Your job is to raise men and women who are responsible, who will rather suffer any sacrifice rather than cause harm to others and harm to themselves. You look at your children and you see, they are rude to you and their siblings. Well, it seems to be a fact that kids one predictor of the way young people will treat their husbands and wives is the way they treat their grown-up siblings. I know this woman one time, as she was going off to the university, her father told her the following piece of advice. He said, honey, you're going to be going with a number of men. You're going to fall in love with one of those men someday. And you may think he will be your husband. I want you to take a real close look at the way he treats the people in the family he comes from. His brothers and sisters, his mother and father. Is he happy to talk with them? Does he talk about them with affection? Is he happy to hear from them? Does he remember birthdays and anniversaries? Is he proud of them? Is he delighted to hear from them? Or, on the other hand, is he cool, distant, doesn't talk much about them, doesn't think much about them, tries to lie or evade away from them? Because guess what, honey? That's a preview of coming attractions. The way a man treats the family he forms is shown by the way he treats the family he came from. Now, that sounds like a pretty good piece of advice, doesn't it? Look at it this way. Every time you correct your children in the way they deal with each other, and the way they deal with their close friends, you are preparing them for the way they will later treat their spouse. Think ahead. It's an apprenticeship in dealing with other people with ethics, with kindness, with considerateness, with fairness. Kids respond very well to appeals to their sense of fairness, especially boys. Boys almost always respond when you appeal to their sense of what's fair. You know, do they have just an idea, that life is nothing but play and pleasure? Nothing but play and pleasure, except for the drudgery we have to do, tutorials and keeping up with our work. Then someday, if they meet with economic downturn, someday if they meet with setbacks, they lose their first job, or simply, they're making enough money to gratify their appetites, they will seek escape. They'll find it in drugs, they may find it in alcohol, they may find it in promiscuous sex, and they will break your hearts. One of the ways in which you parents have to think ahead is to realize someday your children, let's all hope so, will be parents themselves. And I have to tell you this, because this is something that's sort of the collective experience of humankind. Namely, that there comes a time in life, we keep changing in life. And I don't know if you folks have noticed this, but every decade of life goes twice as fast as the one before. Your kids grow up with startling swiftness, and they're out on their own. They will only grow up, not when they can take care of themselves, because a houseplant can take care of itself. They will grow up when they can take care of others and want to. And if they've not learned that, concern for others, by the time they leave your home, they may not present you with grandchildren. Or you'll see your grandchildren in agony from being mistreated somehow. As you grow older, they say it's like this. What accounts for the bond, the special bond there is between grandparents and their grandchildren? We all know about that. There's just something about the way our grandparents look at us that's different from the way our parents look at us. In our parents we see often disapproval, disappointment, anger. In our grandparents we see pure love. Pure love. Well, somebody has put it this way. We enter into the world with a sense of love. Kids are filled with love. Love for your family. You get up in the morning, love for play. Life is just pure love. And when you're a teenager, you see a whole new dimension to love. The capacity for giving, for making somebody else happy, for taking all of your powers and giving them to somebody else. That kind of generosity that comes with love. Marriage is not a 50-50 proposition. It's really an 80-20 or 90-10 proposition, where each one tries to give more than he or she receives back. But then comes marriage itself, and then life becomes complicated. Bills, deadlines, sleepless nights, one problem after another, worries and concerns about what faces the kids. And then finally, your children leave and go off into the world. And then you look around and you say, I was right the first time. Life really is all about love. When you look down at your grandchildren, you see your own life beginning all over again. That is that special bond. Now, this I have to tell you, if you don't raise your children right, you could lose your grandchildren. If they turn out to be absolutely narcissistic people, you will not have grandchildren. And that could make the last years of your life incredibly lonely. Or, if they have been utterly selfish in the way they've been brought up, if you haven't taught them the real meaning of married love, which we'll hear about this afternoon, if they don't understand what married love is all about, their marriage could fly apart. Did you know, my friends, the divorce rate in the United States is 50%? 50%. 1 out of every 4 children is growing up in a single-parent home. It is causing immense disaster to my society. Don't let it happen to yours. Love each other. Raise your children right. And the investment comes later on. I've heard some grandparents have been known to say, if I'd known grandchildren was so much fun, I would have skipped the middle part. Everything comes together then. But if your son, for example, and your son marries a young woman and he's had very bad judgment in the marriage, there's something about her that strikes you as uneasy. She could, the two of them may have 1 or 2 to 3 children, and then she finds, because she is selfish, somebody else, and she wants to trade in her husband for a new model. Or your own son wants to get somebody else and abandons his wife, and you could lose your grandchildren precisely at the time of life when you most want and need them, when you need them as an object for your love and affection, and when they need you. Think ahead. Now, you see, if your children do not respect you, they will have no respect for any other rightful authority. This is one reason the state has such an important investment in children having respect for their mother and father. Because, you see, it seems to work this way. If kids do not respect, now I don't just mean fear, all right? If they do not respect their mother and their father's rightful authority, authority meaning the right to be obeyed, they will have no respect for any other authority. They will have trouble with their bosses. They will have trouble with their teachers. They will eventually perhaps have trouble with the law. And as you know, in a compact society like that could be fatal to their careers. They've got to respect your rightful authority. Another feature I've had, aside from this long-distance vision, another feature I've seen in effective parents is they have a unity between the husband and the wife. Unity. That is, they know the kids have one conscience and one mind and have to receive one and the same set of directions from both parents. And when kids do have unity in their mother and father, do you know what happens to them? They grow up to be confident men and women. Confidence comes from living in a safe, loving environment. When the husband and the wife bury their differences, apologize, say, I'm sorry, all the things we're going to hear about this afternoon, all right, then the kids grow up to be confident men and women. And let's face it, confident people go very, very far in life. I don't know if any of you has ever worked for somebody who's not confident at all. It is pure hell. It is just awful. Confident people are fun to work with. They're enjoyable to work with. They are the ones who attract their boss's notice. They're the ones who move up in the world. And a huge part of that is growing up in a loving, unified family. This means, among other things, that parents try to avoid harsh, bitter disagreements with each other. They have some kind of a sign or signal. If they sense something is going out of control, they'll give the timeout sign, or they'll tap a watch. Now, these are Americans I'm talking about, huh? You make your own adjustment, please. I'm sure you've had enough Americans telling you what to do over the years, huh? I'm describing things. I'm not prescribing. You have to put this into your own culture. The point is that they purposely delay the argument so that the children will not be scared. Kids today are scared when they see their mother and their father fight. It leads to a great deal of unself-confidence in them and insecurity. This affects their studies. Confident people know how to concentrate. Insecure people cannot concentrate. They're too concerned about themselves. It affects their work. Not to mention their dealings with other people. Not to mention their concept of what marriage is all about. If kids grow up in a harshly bitter family, goodness knows, who the heck wants to form a family of their own? It's like that. When they see the love that's in their family, that's the love they will seek within their spouse. You have to also realize, respecting gender differences. Men don't seem to realize very much that women need appreciation. They need to hear the words, I love you. Thank you for everything. I remember Boss one time, a man who was the president of Hollister Corporation in Chicago. Very, very successful man. He said, at some point I realized that if I treated my employees with the same indifference that I treated my wife with, they'd quit on me. They'd all leave me. It was Elie Wiesel, the great Holocaust thinker, who said, the opposite of love is not hatred. The opposite of love is indifference. You know, women are verbal creatures. That's something men notice, you know, from the time they're small. Did you know they've done surveys that have found that women talk twice as many words a day as men do? In the U.S., men talk about 12,500 words. Women talk about 25,000 words. That's why when men come home, you know, their wife comes home from where she is, the man sits down, wants peace and quiet, his wife comes, she wants to talk about the problems. You know, she wants some reassurance that she's doing a good thing, that she's still beautiful, that she's a great woman. You know, the things she used to hear, you know, a long time ago. And the father is thinking, on the other hand, the man is thinking, honey, I've used up my 12,500 words. So men have to realize women need to hear this. If they don't receive thanks and appreciation from their husbands, where are they going to receive them from? Not from the kids, that's for darn sure. The kids come into the world as utter ingrates, don't they? And besides, you know, if a woman, you know, even in normal homes where the woman works outside the home professionally, you know, women usually wind up doing all the same 80% of the housework. I'm sure it's the same here as in the U.S. They still wind up doing 80% of the work at home. Part of the reason for that is that the men perceive that their wives are competent and they are incompetent. That's the perception. It's also the truth. I knew women, you know, who wanted their husband, you know, dress the kids, you know, put their clothes on and so forth, and then they look and they see what results from that. You know, kids look like Bozo the Clown, the colors don't go together. There's no question women have a power, many powers in the family that men just simply do not have. And that leads to the other thing, the other gender difference, that women have to understand that males are very, very, very sensitive to the notion of competence. Competence is very, very important to men. The ability to put your powers up against some problems and lick them and solve them. And that is one reason why, you know, women who are more concerned with, you know, with social graces and with people getting along, with harmony within the family, and who have this ability to, you know, to overcome insoluble problems. You know, women are much more accustomed to mystery and to dealing with insoluble problems. You know, the monthly cycle, you know, the whole mystery of birth and gestation, the power that women have that boys notice, you know, that mothers have, looking straight into your eyes and reading your mind. You know, there's something mysterious about women from males' point of view. So women are accustomed to charging right ahead into problems. Come on, let's get this thing done. Men will not approach and tackle a problem until they have studied it, so that in doing it, they will not look like a fool. One of the most, it's like this. Women in general want to be liked. Men want to be respected. And given a choice between liked or respected, men would insist on being respected. You know, somebody doesn't like me, that's his problem, but he's going to respect me. All right, that's one reason why 13-year-old boys, and all the maleness comes to the forefront, often have trouble with their mothers. You know, you're acting like a barbarian. Nobody's going to like you. The kid doesn't care whether anybody likes him. He wants people to respect him as a barbarian. His fellow men. I'm going to get to that. The last talk I had this morning, I'm going to get into some matters of adolescence, you know, how to deal with adolescence, because that's where everything comes together, everything you've been trying to teach. So one of the lessons that mothers tell their daughters, you know, from time to time is, you know, men, you know, they grunt a lot. They take personally any material thing that resists their will. You know, they yell at things that won't work for them. All right, they're just peculiar creatures. But underneath, they may not seem to have an emotional life, but they really do. They do care as much as women do about things. They just don't show it. And they often don't know how to express it. That's sort of the secret that mothers pass on to daughters, you know. And mothers tell their daughters, don't ever, ever, ever put your man on the spot in front of his friends. Don't ever embarrass him or make him look weak in front of his friends. Men hate that. That's the one thing they will not stand. And the thing that annoys them most in married life, annoys them most of all, is the fact that, for men, to forgive is to forget. Let the thing drift across in history. Forgive and forget. Let's move on. Get on with life. But men notice that for women, yes, we forgive, but we don't forget. They drag things up from the history that was supposed to have been buried years ago. And it drives men crazy. So that's the other secret that women pass on. Suppress your desire to say, remember 3 years ago when you did this thing before. All of these things make for unity in the marriage, and that makes kids confident. They can go out there in the world and tackle anything. And in their dealings with people, they will go very, very far. I'm going to come back to that later. I see our time is up. I've gone 5 minutes overdue. It's time for us to take a break. I look forward to talking to you in a few minutes. Thank you.